I'm super excited to be here moderating this panel. We have an all-star guests lined up on this panel. We've got, well, first of all, the panel is the VC and is on the VC and fintech hypergrowth in Latin America. I've been following Latin America's startup scene for about 5 years. I've watched it explode. I'm not shocked by it, but I am impressed with the velocity in which it just took off over the past couple of years. So it's been really exciting as a reporter covering the space. And here on this panel, we have 3 investors who've been backing startups in the area for a little while now. That they include Angela Strange, who is general partner at A16Z, also known as Andreessen Horowitz. And then we have Nico Skekasy, managing partner at Kaszek, and Nick Shalek, who's general partner at Ribbit Capital. So first off, thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited to talk with you and get your thoughts on the exploding Latin American startup scene in particular when it comes to fintech.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
Yeah, of course. So there's a lot of things going on. For one, we've seen the number of investment dollars surge, especially in the past 2 or 3 years. The latest statistics I've seen is that fintech funding in particular more than tripled in 2021 in Latin America and into the over 10 billion mark, which sounds incredible to me. So each of you I know have invested in fintechs in the region. What would you attribute, or what reasons would you say that has led to this type of growth, especially in fintech in Latin America? I have my own thoughts, but would love to hear, of course, more directly from you. So, Angela, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think, so listen, there's never been a more exciting time to be an entrepreneur in Latin America. And conversely, as a result, never a more exciting time to also be a venture capitalist in LATAM. I think this is obviously increasing momentum, but it has been building for a very long time. Bunch of reasons. I love this quote I often use from Enrique from Brex, who says, it's hard to find a great idea in the US, in Brazil. There's lots of obvious ideas. And that's demonstrated. We founded the firm on software eats the world. Tech GDP is relative to the broader GDP in Brazil. Mexico is just much, much lower. So there's just a lot of software to be built. Mm-hmm. And so where is this momentum coming from? I'll list a couple of reasons and then open it up to my esteemed colleagues on the panel here. One, I think there's just some great proof points of entrepreneurs who have proven some of what can be done, right? Like we have a Mercado Libre founder on this call, but there's now like Nubank, Rappi, Loft, dLocal, right? And so there's a beacon of very, very large companies, tech companies can be built from the ground up in Brazil. And a lot of the talented next generation of entrepreneurs are spinning out from those companies and doing that. Two, it's smartphone, talking financial services in general, smartphone penetration close to 80%, credit card penetration very, very low. So the next bank branch is in everybody's phones, very poor access to financial services. And then I think the third is just, I'll take Brazil again in the favorite Bezos quote of your margin is my opportunity. The banks are very profitable. They serve a small percentage of the population, not very well from a digital perspective, and that opens up a lot of opportunity for new companies.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. Nick or Nico, would you like to go next?
Should I go, Nick?
Go for it.
Yeah. So I think it's always good to take a step back to understand what has happened to the tech ecosystem more broadly over the last decade. And when you look at the numbers, it's really incredible. Venture capital as a whole, the total investment into LATAM was something like $500 million not so long ago, a few years ago. And it was like that for a number of years. When we were starting with Kaszek, it was at that level. And then it went to 1 billion and to 2 billion and to 4 billion. And last year it was, I think, 16 billion in total. So what has been happening in fintech is part of that. Growth in capital has been exponential. And in parallel, all of the other key elements of a strong ecosystem have been evolving very, very nicely as part of this longer term secular trend. So fintech is part of that. Why fintech in particular has had such a large share of total investments? I think there are a number of reasons. Similar to what Angela was saying, the banks have historically focused on higher income individuals, AAA corporates, by the way, charging very high prices, offering very low transparency, and they have abandoned all of the other segments that can be very attractive with the right strategy. So these incumbents have very large market caps. They have operated as oligopolies. And I was going to say something similar to what Angela said. They were basically focused on extracting margin. So there's an amazing opportunity for fintechs to eat part of that lunch and gain share. And that is very interesting. But I think that even more interesting than this share gain is to provide solutions, new solutions that expand the market. The current TAM that the incumbents have created is large, but the sky is the limit in terms of potential TAM from new initiatives. So the picture overall, when you look at that, is one of very, very low penetration in LATAM relative to the US or Europe or other markets on the most basic financial products. So starting like even with bank accounts, credit cards, payment solutions, mortgages. Very few people buy a house with a mortgage. Investments, insurance. These are all still very, very low relative to population, relative to GDP. So I'll stop there, but I think entrepreneurs evidently have identified these two types of opportunities, both taking share from things that exist by now and also creating new things that are not out there.
Right. And Nick, what do you think? I know your firm has been investing in Latin America for several years now, right?
That's right. No, Angela and Nico really told this story very well. I'm not sure I have a ton to add. I think it's when there's a lot of entrepreneurial talent, a lot of it coming out of amazing companies like Mercado Libre and Nubank and Rappi. And when that coincides with consumers having a major pain point and there being the tech, the rails for software entrepreneurs to start reaching those consumers, you get some pretty fantastic, really interesting things built. And it's I guess the one thing I'd add to it is this panel's about Latin America, but this is happening all over the world. I think it's happening in a more pronounced way in Latin America. The funding specifically, though, if you look at Southeast Asia, or you looked at India, or you looked at East Asia, other parts of East Asia, or Europe, or even the US, you're seeing the same kind of growth in funding to fintech. You're not always seeing the same outcomes because I think these markets do, as Angela described, like they have a lot of margin to go after. And as Nico talked about, there's just a lot of parts of the market that haven't been very well served historically. Mm-hmm. So, as we get into this next phase of fintech, which I'm sure we'll get on to talking about, there are a lot of different directions this can go. And, fortunately, plenty of new investors who hadn't invested in Latin America before. And Nico could probably tell us stories of what it was like raising money for, some of the companies that have turned out to be successful now 5 or 6 years ago. I think it was very different. But a lot of investors have gotten excited have hired up in the region and, recognize that there's this sort of deep well of talent there now.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things that I've observed in covering the region. One, there's definitely been a need from the inclusion perspective, as Nico alluded to, that a lot of the financial institutions in the region targeted the more affluent populations in their countries, and that left out a large number of people who just didn't have access to more, affordable financial products. So I think there's been a huge need for that with the increased smartphone penetration, more just people online generally, which was accelerated by the pandemic. That's opened up a lot of opportunity for startups in the region. So I think it's amazing for everyone in the country to see more technology being applied to help a greater number of the population all over LATAM. So that's, just my...
Mary Ann, can I add something to the prior question,
Sure.
Which I think is also relevant? Fintech is much harder than, for example, software to expand internationally. Fintech is a very local game. It requires multiple local integrations, regulatory approvals, deep understanding of the local risks, relevant customer support. So if you're building something like a search engine, social network, some software models, you can operate out of Silicon Valley. Some of the global players can take their share there. But if you want to build a digital bank or go deep into a fintech vertical, it is absolutely essential that you are local. So that is why there's a share of investments and startups in the fintech space in LATAM that is really overrepresented relative to other spaces, because you need to get it done with a local team and starting in Brazil or Mexico or wherever you decide to start.
Yeah, that's a good point. And definitely the local familiarity and knowledge of each particular market is extremely important. And then I think all of you may have alluded to the fact that since we've been seeing more success in the region and greater number of unicorns, a lot of these companies are spawning a new generation of entrepreneurs who are now doing their own things and inspired and motivated by the success of the companies they may have worked at. And so I think that's helped fuel the startup scene in the whole region. It's been fascinating to watch. But in particular, what trends are you all seeing that you're finding appealing to business models? I mean, I've seen a ton of infrastructure, for example, happening in the country and like in Latin America in general, but like in Brazil and Mexico, especially, but all over, because there was a lot of need for improved infrastructure. But like, what about you all? What trends are you drawn to, or what business models are you most seeing the most potential?
I'm happy to go. Angela really coined this idea that every company is a fintech company, or I think that's her tagline. But the basic concept is
sorry, I didn't know that.
So I'm going to steal her thunder. But that software businesses, online, digital marketplaces that have the right relationship with customers, have access to customer data, and are already sitting in a position of facilitating financial transactions are actually really logical providers of financial services or distributors of financial services. Now, many of those companies are also at their core, they're software businesses. They don't want to do all the hard work that Nico described that you have to do locally to be able to enable lending or payments or insurance or other things. So they need companies that they rely on, some of the infrastructure companies that you're talking about, Mary Ann. And I think those opportunities to back these software companies, what we'd call like distributors, or the infrastructure providers, something what we call enablers, that exists all over the world. But I think it's more profound maybe in Latin America than in other markets. And I guess I see two reasons for that. And I'm curious what Nico and Angela would say. One is many of the industries that are now being organized by software, they have less defined or they have more fragmented industry, industry structures than what we'd see in the US. So take something like what the Frubana team has been building in food distribution. They have, very, very fragmented market on both sides. You look in the US and there's a high degree of maturity with, the way that food is bought and sold. And I think that creates a chance for some of these software companies to come in and bring financial services along with, what they do. The second thing is while there were some gaps in infrastructure in payments, for example, the changing regulatory regime around things like Pix in Brazil, which has really taken off rapidly, has created sort of like a huge discontinuous jump in the kinds of consumer and small business experiences that you can create as a software entrepreneur relative to what the financial services incumbents are doing. So we were talking before about, your margin is my opportunity. There's also how big of a improvement can you make in the experience? So when I look at companies, just to pick one in our portfolio, like Cora, which is serving small businesses, and what they're doing with Pix and the kind of experience they're creating, it's pretty phenomenally different and better than what a lot of small businesses can get from other places. So we're excited about investing in those trends in particular.
Yeah, I think so. There is a lot of infrastructure. I think a bit to Nick's point, there's still a lot of opportunity for infrastructure. And so just to illustrate it a little bit, this is maybe just a little over 3 years ago. One of the first investments I made in the region was a company called Adi, which is buy now, pay later, Colombia, now in Brazil.
Mhm.
And one of the interesting things, as I'm often describing to my American colleagues, is unlike in the US, where you can get KYC as a service, compliance as a service, ledger as a service, and, right? Like Adi had to build all of that because it just didn't exist. And even now, 3-4 years later, yes, they do have some as a service providers, but it's probably surprising to those, not in the region, that there's still a lot of gaps of things to be built.
Mhm.
I think there's a couple reasons for that, but one of the main ones is you think of entrepreneurs that could start some of these infrastructure companies, and they're not easy because you need to know like enough nuances, a little bit to Nico's prior point of like the regulation, the payments infrastructure. You have this question of who do I sell to? And up until recently, the only people to really sell to would be some of the old incumbents that are using some of the old incumbent software. And like, yes, they probably should be on modern API-based software, but the sales cycles are going to take forever and no early company is going to be survived. So if you think of the like selling to the old versus selling to the new, there just wasn't enough new to sell to. And so the ecosystem wasn't getting going. And now you have more pure fintech companies you can sell to. But then to Nick's point, you have all of these other software companies that are looking to add financial services that also need your infrastructure. And so we've finally got that flywheel going.
Right. And Nico, you've been in the region for a few years, so you've watched all this happen. So what about you? What trends has your firm excited?
So I think the best way to describe trends is to try to go a little bit over the investments that we've made over these years, and they reflect some of these trends. So one of our earlier investments out of our first fund was in Nubank, when basically David Vélez wanted to build the largest bank in Latam. That was what he was pitching. And today, when you fast forward, by the way, he had to build a lot of the engines, like the processor, and because there were solutions in the market that were not at the speed that Nubank needed to delight its customers. So there's a lot of infrastructure that had to be built at the time. And Nubank has become a horizontal bank that includes basically all of the relevant banking verticals. And then we have invested in a lot of more specific companies that have gone deep into some of these verticals. So, for example, Creditas, they have cracked B2C secured financing, and they managed to help people that were drowning in debt with very high interest rates, but they had a car or they had a property, and they could leverage that and reduce their interest rate by 90% and get out of that financial mess. And they have been doing really well. Nick mentioned Cora. We have invested in Cora, in Confio, Credit Justo, Zeppelin. These are all companies that are trying to address B2B banking needs that is very, very underserved. So different geographies, different specific segments that they are tackling. We invested in Warren in Brazil, Fintual in Spanish Latam, that helps individuals with wealth management needs. This is a very, very undeveloped space. The percentage of individuals that own equities in Mexico or Brazil is absolutely insignificant relative to US or other more developed markets. We have invested in Bitso, for example, in crypto, Kushki, in payments. We have invested in a number of insurance companies, for example, Alice in Brazil and Sofia in Mexico, both in the health insurance space. There are many more. I don't want to bore here the group and the audience, but I think this illustrates the types of investments that we've done. And then in terms of I think both Angela and Nick alluded to this embedded fintech. I love, Angela, I don't know if I can use your phrase or if you have a copyright on that, and I will have to pay royalties.
Hopefully we find more companies along that theme.
But I can tell you, couldn't agree more. In the early days of Mercado Libre, we developed Mercado Pago in 2003. It was a payments infrastructure to facilitate transactions between buyers and sellers. And there was a vision for what that would become over time. And I think that the team has really delivered there. It wasn't called fintech. It wasn't called embedded finance, but clearly that was what it was. There were tens, hundreds of millions of users and a need for something like this. And then in our portfolio, Quinto Andar with properties, Kavak with cars, Nuvem Shop that enables merchants to go online. They are all fintech companies to a large degree, and more and more as time passes. And then last but not least, of course, all of this construction requires this infrastructure, data, rails as a base from where to build. And in the days of Nubank or Mercado Libre, we had to build everything. Now we have companies like Belvo, that is also a portfolio company that is super relevant at the center of this creation of new companies and services that deliver fintech solutions.
Yeah, I think all that's really interesting. And when you mentioned Nubank, isn't it true that Nubank is now not only the largest digital bank in Brazil, but all over the world? It is now like the world's largest digital bank.
Yeah, I think it is the largest digital bank in the world, and it should become the largest bank in Latin America in terms of every metric. And in terms of digital banks, today it is the largest in the world.
Yeah, I think that's really impressive. Another thing I don't know if a lot of people realize about Latin America is when you mentioned interest rates, I mean, they are just absolutely crazy compared to what we have. Even though they can be quite high here in the US, it's still, I think, almost pales in comparison to the kind of interest rates that people have had to face in LatAm over the past few years. So I really love that there's so many fintechs that are popping up to help, offer alternatives to people so that they can actually get out of this cycle of debt and not just always be trying to pay off these enormous interest rates in addition to any debt they already had. So I really love that it's helping address this in the region. But anyway, enough about what I think. So we know that Brazil has I guess always been the largest recipient of venture funding in the region. Historically, it is extremely large country, so that kind of makes sense. Lately, I've been seeing more dollars going into Mexico, quite a lot of money flowing into that country as well. But certainly, there's growth all over in LatAm. So what countries in particular do you think have the most potential right now? Angela?
Yeah, I think so. We're backing entrepreneurs from all over the region, and I think there's strong strengths if you come from a country that's large enough where if you're the X of that country, that builds a very, very large business. But there's also very strong strengths if you come from a smaller country like Uruguay, because it means that you're building, at least pan Latin America or potentially globally right from the start. And so you might make different infrastructure decisions. You might think about your product a little bit differently. And so in some ways, your potential to move between countries might be a little bit more baked in from the beginning versus if you start in a larger country like Mexico, you build everything out, you're very successful. And then 3 years into your journey, you think about how do you expand. So strong strengths, no matter where you're coming from, in our opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Nick, what do you think? Or Nico, please go ahead.
No. Do you want to go ahead, Nick? Okay. No, totally agree. But by far, Brazil is the most sophisticated market, even before the tech, the financial services industries. It has deep capital markets, and I think for a number of years, even there's an ad, you can check it in YouTube. Bill Gates was doing a bank for an advertising for Unibanco, Itaú, home banking. I think it was in 1995. So there's been a lot of things going on, and Pix is the latest chapter of that journey. Still massive gaps, even though Brazil is the most sophisticated. And from there to the rest of the countries, everybody's coming from behind. Particularly Mexico, penetration of financial products is very, very low. So that's a huge opportunity in this catching up. Chile is also quite sophisticated, similar to Brazil, but it's very small. So I totally agree with Angela. Sometimes that creates in the entrepreneurs, in the founders, they understand that they have a need from the day that the company is born to think about becoming regional. So we have done a couple of investments over the last couple of years in Chilean companies, Fintual and Zeppelin, and they are very, very focused in developing the Spanish Latam market for now. Kushki is a team that started the business in Ecuador. So you see a lot of activity in every country. Argentina has a super sophisticated network of entrepreneurs focused on crypto. So there are a lot of really, really interesting developments going on there. So every country you have talent. If you're lucky and you start in Brazil, you can build a multi-billion-dollar market cap company just by focusing there. If you don't want to move to other parts, everywhere else, you need to think more about a regional strategy.
And Nico's describing, what we've sort of experienced investing in the region over the last 10 years. When we first, in the early days of Ribbit, our assumption was you really couldn't build for multiple markets. Or just we'd hear entrepreneurs talk about it, but we'd say, to ourselves, that's a really hard thing to do for a lot of the reasons that Nico described earlier about why fintech is local. I think that continues to be true. It's really different to build a lending business in Brazil versus in Mexico. And I'm just picking lending, but could be any category. But we are seeing entrepreneurs who start thinking that way from the very beginning. And Adi is a great example of a company that started in Colombia and now is growing in Brazil. And that was part of the plan for Santiago and his team from the very beginning. And so the ambition of the entrepreneurs has increased. The thing that I'll add it's just, this is happening. It's kind of happening all over the world. And it's just a consequence of post-COVID that the locus of a company is becoming much broader. And crypto is probably going to be the most pronounced version of this. We see crypto teams in India now that are talking about serving the Latin American market, or crypto teams from Argentina, to Nico's point, who have the expertise, have been working on it for a really long time, who are building some of the best products we see in the world. So when we think about investing in crypto, we almost do that in a geographically agnostic way, because the fundamental technology it's designed in a way where anybody in the world can use it. Now, I'm oversimplifying because there are lots of benefits of serving local markets too, and making it easy for consumers by integrating deeply with the local banking rails and payment systems. But I think this is a trend. We're all going to be backing entrepreneurs in Brazil and in Mexico who don't just talk about serving those markets, but talk about, to your point about Nubank, being one of the biggest players in whatever they do in the world.
Yeah, I think, or I might just add to the point that Nick made, which is great in terms of global companies. And, we've been thinking about it. If the company of the future is almost default global, like, what does that mean? You have employees in more countries right from day one. You operate in more countries. You serve more countries. And so what kind of opportunity does that create? You probably need the infrastructure, right, to just help you get your company set up faster, all of the sort of software in a box for your company in more markets than companies might have been started before. Your just general financial services infrastructure needs to be global, right, faster. We're like, for instance, we're investors in Jeeves, right, which is a corporate credit card that works in multiple countries right from the beginning, because now that's very important for a much broader set of companies. And so I expect we'll see more companies like, Jeeves, Latitude, others that help companies get started faster in more countries.
I think that's a good point. And this week I wrote about a company that was working on, that had an open API-based model. I feel like I'm seeing more of this in the region. So how do you think this plays? What kind of role do you think these sort of models are playing in the growth of the fintech ecosystem in the country? I mean, I guess by allowing more access, or what do you think, or how do you think it's contributing to the growth?
I think it's going to contribute to the growth in pretty phenomenal ways. I mean, we've already referenced it a bit, and Nico was talking about how there's been a long history of talking about open banking. But when you see, I think Pix now has 125 million people using it. It's really the fastest growing open payments system anywhere in the world. We forever for the past few years, we're marveling at UPI in India, which is a similar system, and Pix has grown 3 times as fast. I mean, it's really amazing. And then when I guess open banking has been happening in Brazil in a few phases. The first couple of phases in a way haven't made that big of a difference, but this third phase we're really excited about because it involves payment initiation. And once you have open payment initiation, you can imagine some experiences that are just much, much simpler, much faster for the consumer. And ultimately this change creates windows for software entrepreneurs who are not weighed down by legacy infrastructure, or not weighed down by some of the talent issues or the business model issues that hold the incumbents back, who come in and just get really fixated on the customer and the problem they're trying to solve, and they're able to use these new primitives basically to create something that the consumer is just trying to accomplish something in their daily life. They don't, so if they can do it faster and cheaper and better, they're going to be happy to do that.
Makes sense.
Yeah, what I would add to that is that we discussed this before. Embedding financial services for sure can generate a much better user experience, reduce friction points in almost any type of product, and at the same time, it's an additional source of revenue monetization for the company that delivers that. So it's a no-brainer. But in the past, companies had to develop internally a bunch of things if they wanted to deploy, and doing that from scratch, that things that were not necessarily core, building these blocks to achieve some of their objectives was something that could be a distraction, or they would not have the capabilities. And today, companies can really undertake this type of opportunities, partnering with API-based companies, and go to market faster and deploying significantly less resources. So these partnerships, if you have the right type of companies that deliver these solutions, this is absolutely key. And these API providers lower barriers to entry, and companies go from having to invest huge budgets and long time cycles, sometimes even trying to resolve regulatory constraints in spaces that they are not experts on, and now they have plug and play solutions. So it's an amazing development.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch that evolve. Angela, do you have any thoughts on that?
Maybe the one thing I'd add is, so a lot of the consumer solutions and a lot of the business solutions that you would want to build to serve the 50 to 80% of the populations across countries that aren't well served often require access into your banking data. And a lot of consumers, like, to make the business models work, your just infrastructure costs needs to be relatively low so that you can serve lower income consumers. And I think open APIs are just one of the tools that allow keeping that infrastructure really low, which is just like good for, governments like are smart to implement these, because what it does is it just opens up more companies that can build more products for, constituents before, where maybe the business models might not have worked. And now they can, in part because the infrastructure costs are low enough.
Yes, I agree. I'm not sure exactly how much time we have left. So I think just in case, I'm going to jump to a question that I don't want us to miss. We've talked a lot about what's happened in Latin America, what's going on right now, but what about looking ahead? Where do you see things going in the region in terms of fintech? I think, like you all have said, there's so much opportunity there, and it's been interesting watching more and more investors come to the region to look for opportunity, because the US, there's already been a lot, right? So I feel like if I were an investor, I would also be looking at Latin America. But looking ahead, like where do you think this is all going to go? I mean, what's next for this Latin American fintech ecosystem?
I can say something very, very simple. I think this is part of a long-term journey, and we see where we're coming from the last 3-5 years. And I think there's going to be a continuation of this. There are going to be entrepreneurs that will identify some of the still open spaces, others that will go deeper into some of the spaces that some are already tackling. Many of the companies that we discussed, that some are more developed, will continue growing, and some are very early, so they need to continue building their user base and their infrastructures. So overall, there seems to be massive opportunities. As we said before, some things that are covered by incumbents, but very poorly. But most of the open space is not that. It's things that nobody is covering. So that's why so many founding teams, entrepreneurs have decided that this is what they want to dedicate their lives to, because this is where they see the most opportunity impact. And when there's something great happening, capital always follows. Then we can discuss, definitely, this is a colder market than maybe 6 months ago. So maybe this is a year where there will be plenty of digesting. Companies have raised capital, they have product market fit, they will focus on playing their game. I'm not sure that there will be $16 billion coming into the region in 2022 as they came in 2021. But there's plenty of interest and plenty of great opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really well said. The fundraising environment is changing. So the short-term headlines may be that in Latin America and in other places, there's actually less investment, and that tech is, becomes sort of less sexy or out of favor. And this will be missing the bigger point. Mm-hmm. Even if that's true, I think people tend to fixate on fundraising. And actually the thing, to go back to what Angela, I think, said very, very beginning of this conversation, was it sort of starts with the entrepreneurs. And the amazing thing now is to watch, I think that, we've been referencing it, but like, I remember reading a stat that something like $2 billion of capital has been raised by people who have left Rappi. And it's that intellectual capital, that energy, combined with all these opportunities that Nico's describing, that are going to carry us forward. So there are lots of spaces to be excited about: crypto, B2B infrastructure, digital B2B marketplaces. But I think we'll probably be surprised by what ends up working, just like we were surprised by how amazing Nubank became. I mean, we, have always been a huge fans of David, but the size and scale of the business that he's built is really phenomenal. And yeah. I think as the market pulls back, if it does, there'll be great chances to look at some of the more mature companies for investors. If I think about a Quinto Andar or Kaszek as examples, these are really phenomenal businesses with strong network effects, real huge advantages to scale, run by really ambitious entrepreneurs. And I think they're just getting started in terms of what they can do. If we think back to where Mercado Libre was 10 years ago versus where it is today, I think that some of those entrepreneurs have opportunities to build really generational businesses in the region and maybe even beyond the region. So that's what what we're expecting to see.
Yep. Very briefly, I think we're just getting started. Two things. For the larger companies in LATAM, I think there's now close to 40-ish unicorns. We're going to start to see Latin American-based companies go global, and we've already seen that. Like take Kaszek that Nick mentioned, right? They've expanded into Turkey and other countries, and that's going to keep going. And then at the earlier stages, I think more and more, students coming out of colleges and universities are going to start to think of joining startups, starting startups as their sort of first choice in career, which, really didn't feel as accessible or wasn't as common like 3, 5, 7 years ago. And that flywheel is just going to keep going. So I expect that we will be talking about this acceleration still several years from now.
Yeah, I think so. I think all these things that have helped lead to where we are today are just going to continue to evolve. Things that we've already talked about: regulatory changes, changes in consumer behavior, more digital adoption in general. So I don't see anything slowing down like considerably, at least not in my humble opinion. So again, I know I'm not sure exactly how much time. I don't want to miss out on this. I would love to hear from each one of you. Just like one thing that you maybe has you most pumped about LATAM. I know that you all are investing in the region, but you also invest outside of the region. What makes it so exciting for you? What would you say is the highlight of what we've talked about today that gets you the most excited?
I can go very briefly. I think we touched on this a number of times. The fact that I've been around for longer than my co-panelists, and so I've been in the ecosystem here for more than 20 years. And today still looks like day one. The opportunity ahead, in general, in technology, but in fintech in particular, seems larger today than what it looked like 5 years ago or 10 years ago when we were starting with Kaszek, because there are many proof points of things that have happened, but also very clear open spaces of things that can be built, developed, constructed. So more excited today with the future than ever before.
Yeah, I think my corollary to every company will be a fintech company is that every fintech company will spin out several fintech infrastructure companies. Mm-hmm. Now, like, there's a lot of very smart product managers, engineers that have discovered big pain points that are now building those into other companies. And what is that going to do? It's going to inspire the next generation of business and consumer companies to make new financial services, which in many, many cases make people's lives dramatically better. And that's pretty exciting when you're sitting in my side of the table.
Sounds like it. Nick, how about you?
Maybe the single biggest thing is just, one thing we've learned investing in fintech for a decade is that the great companies, their solutions to obvious problems in retrospect, that there's some real customer pain and that the solution comes and it meets that pain. That's, David offering higher quality, lower cost credit service in a market that was starved for it, for example. And when I think about Latin America, it's just this white space that Nico's describing, basically the gap between what exists today and what's possible to build is really wide. And that's what's going to keep us continuing to come and invest in the market. And I think that'll be most pronounced in the most leveraged spaces. So, things like crypto, I think there are many countries, many people in Latin America for whom the idea what cryptocurrency and the potential future it could bring us to represents, it's they recognize the pain point much more so than even consumers who are interested in some of the novel aspects of it in markets like the US. So
that's pretty fascinating, actually. I really enjoyed this. It's funny because I think I've communicated with almost all of you via email or through social media. I haven't had the pleasure of actually talking to you all in person. So very happy that I had this opportunity, and I hope it's not the last time. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. And I get very excited about covering Latin America and the companies in it. I feel like there's a certain energy and excitement there that is pretty unique. And so I can see why you all are so pumped about it. It's a lot of fun as a reporter covering it. I'm really curious to see how things continue to grow and evolve. So I'm sure we'll be having similar discussions as this one in coming years. Thank you for having me.
Likewise. Thank you, Mary Ann.
Amazing.